What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Ham Radio Crash Course. Welcome to Saturday. Today we have two special guests. They're going to talk to us about actual emergency communication, particularly regarding the Helene hurricane and what they learned and what we can all take away as amateur radio operators. Enjoy the memes. We'll get started real soon. How's it going, everybody? I'm Josh, KI6NAZ. A very special topic today. We are going to be talking to Dan and Thomas out in North Carolina, who you've heard of and we've talked about from the Hurricane Helene and the effects there. They were on the radio, and Thomas, I think, more than just a bit. Well, lots of people affected from the hurricane, of course, but Thomas definitely went through it as well, and we're going to talk through a lot of that. But I thought this would be a really interesting time to kind of get some lessons learned from emergency communication standpoint. So I'm going to hit up a couple of things really fast right in the beginning here. Go check out hamtactical.com if you are, oh, there we go. If you're interested in coffee, hamtactical.coffee. But hang on to that for a second, because I got a number of links for some of the groups that are helping out after Hurricane Helene. There's still a number of things that have to be done, people that need to get taken care of. So take a look at the links in the description, as well as Thomas's K4 SWL. I think it's SWLing. He'll correct me if I'm wrong on all of his experiences and some of the blogs he's been putting together. So make sure you go check out the different links we have in the show. Let's take care of our fellow man, make sure everybody gets back to some level of normalcy. But we got a lot to talk about, so I'm going to bring the guests in right up front. So, Dan and Thomas, how are you both doing right now?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, doing great.
Yeah, so I guess let's give everybody kind of an info dump on how are things in Asheville and the greater North Carolina area after the hurricane. What's come back to normal? What's still a problem? How and what's going on?
Okay, so I guess maybe I'll talk first. I can tell you that here in the Asheville area and Swannanoa, I live in Swannanoa, which is sort of next door to Asheville, the next town over. And it was hit especially hard during Helene, especially in the Swannanoa River Valley, which runs through the whole area here. You know, it's been 5 weeks, and I was just telling some friends last night that we drove down a highway like a 2-lane highway that we use all the time. It was just opened up fully just a couple days ago, and piled high on both sides of this 2-lane road is just debris, tons and tons of debris from houses, from people's lives, everything you can imagine, just on either side of the road going down. There's still power lines that you cross on the road as you drive it.
Wow.
In this area, it was hit so hard, I think the floodwaters were probably about 8 feet over like the road where we were driving, and over the like up to the second level of most people's houses in that area. Mm-hmm. So that is, you know, that it's been 5 weeks and they're still just kind of digging out that area so that the road is passable again. Many bridges are out.
What's the state of power like then? If the power lines are down, how many people, do they have a number for how many people are without power at this time?
So at the moment, you know, I haven't checked today. There's still some very rural areas around here, little pockets that don't have power, mainly because they're just so inaccessible right now from bridges being out and things.
Sure.
But the power company did a pretty good job. We were without power here at our house for 2.5 weeks. Wow. And you know, I think most people in the city of Asheville had power, you know, probably a week before us, but they still today do not have potable water in Asheville. So when you can't drink the water in Asheville that's coming out of the taps, you know.
Yeah, that was going to be my other question, is the effect of water. And so what does that look like? Is there some kind of plan to get that corrected, or what are you guys doing? You're boiling water? And
so I live in kind of a rural, remote, part of the county. We have well water.
Oh.
And so it was fine. We also live really close to the top of the ridgeline. The ridgeline's maybe 200 feet above us. So even during the storm, we didn't have any kind of runoff or anything that would have messed up our well water at all. So we were actually okay. In Asheville, all three of the reservoirs were affected. The main one that supplies like 80% of all the Asheville area was damaged really, really badly. It was it was just devastated. The pipes, everything, the road getting to it. They finally got the water flowing, but they think it'll still be weeks before they can have potable water yet. They're trying some just innovative things as a stopgap measure to make the water drinkable.
Wow.
But it'll still be weeks yet before that happens. I had to go to the hospital to visit a family member a couple days ago, and around the main hospital here in Asheville, Mission Hospital, there's like all these tanker trucks full of water pumping in 300,000 gallons of fresh water a day so the hospital can operate. Still doing it.
That's still a harrowing amount of human effort to make that work. That's that's wild. So Dan, Thomas has been with us before. Thanks again, Thomas, for coming back. But Dan Gittro, you're a new guest here, K2DMG. Dan, you kind of function as one of the primary net ops on a pretty prominent repeater in the area. Can you kind of catch us up on kind of what the traffic's been like on the repeater, and maybe tell us a little bit about it? Before we got the show started, you mentioned that you're 6,500 feet up or so on the machine.
Yeah, the repeater sits at, I believe, 6680, something like that, somewhere right around there. So the footprint is just massive in all of western North Carolina, the central part of North Carolina, along with Virginia, Tennessee, South Carolina, and Georgia. The footprint is just massive. So starting the Saturday of this storm, the day after, I just threw my call sign out and asking if anybody needed anything. And I never called myself net control. It wasn't anything that I thought would ever turn into what it turned into. People just started calling, asking, "Hey, can you call my loved one for me? Here's the phone number. Call, text, whatever."
Yeah.
And it got to the point it was overwhelming that I had Don, NG4D, Jim, N4SZF, and others came in and assisted making those phone calls and text messages to family.
Have you been a net op before, Dan? I know you don't
No.
call yourself that necessarily. How did you? So you just kind of happen to be boots on the ground because you're kind of somewhat out of the disaster area proper. I think you were saying right before we got started.
We got the storm here, but nowhere to the effect to the western counties. I'm about 100 miles from where Thomas is, and when I started taking these calls from people early Saturday morning, they're saying to me, "We're alive. Can you call my loved one to let them know that we're alive?" And in my head, I'm saying, "What do you mean you're alive? It wasn't that bad." And then,
wow.
There was no communication. I mean, the cell phone towers were down, internet, obviously, all power and water were cut off, and most of the P25 trunking system that the state uses was cut off. So nobody knew just how bad it was until the net started, I guess.
And so is a lot of the traffic you were hearing were amateur radio operators in the disaster area proper kind of reaching out to those that could help get the word out kind of status? Yeah.
By what you just said, that was all Saturday. It was,
All Saturday.
"Hey, I'm alive. Can you contact my loved one?" And then we started doing it for, like, example, Thomas's neighborhood, which is buried into a mountain, by the way. I was up in his neighborhood just a few weeks ago. So we started making phone calls for non-amateur radio operators, letting their family know they were alive. And then Sunday, there was a massive switch. And Sunday changed into, "Hey, we haven't heard from our loved one. Can you go into the affected area and help find our loved one?" And we did that all day Saturday. Thomas and others traveled within their areas and trying to find folks that were not heard from. And I don't know, Thomas, we probably dealt with hundreds of them that day.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, by the way, help me on the date. So you said Saturday, Sunday. So was this the 6th and 7th, or what was the day that it?
Week before.
The week before.
Yeah,
okay.
they did like the 28th. I think the storm hit on Friday the 27th.
Okay.
And so this would have been the 28th and 29th.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So then you start getting these calls for check-in, kind of care check-ins, and
Yep.
and then what was some of the other traffic that you were getting primarily?
Well, both Saturday and Sunday, that was it.
Hmm.
It was all traffic. There was another gentleman, and I can't remember his name. I've only talked to him. I've only talked to him since those dates. He was going around getting us what gas stations had gas, where could you go get
Mm.
water. He was traveling all over Buncombe County, and that was kind of where he was stuck. He couldn't go anywhere else because anywhere else you want to go, you got to go down the mountain, and you couldn't. The roads were washed out.
And I got to ask, just so that I think you already mentioned it, that mainly first responders, they did not have communication because of their systems they were using, the P25. There was no internet, there was no cell phone. So the primary means of communication was kind of freely owned FCC services, right? So FRS, GMRS, and then
Yep.
amateur radio. Obviously, you guys had a really powerful machine, particularly because of its vantage point. So this is almost entirely grassroots communication that was used in these
Oh,
cases.
exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean there were some towers that were for Viper. The North Carolina system here is called Viper. It's owned by the Highway Patrol and multiple different agencies use it. Multiple towers went down. They were very quick to get those back up. I don't want to say that they weren't. That was really a priority for them, so they could get first responders in there with radios. But a lot of that system went down in the early days.
So I would assume that, obviously you mentioned before and then after a lot of these care checks, and that probably continued, I'm guessing, well into the weeks
Well into,
after.
yep.
Yeah. At some point, though, aid starts to come in, or there's some amount of coordination that needs to happen. And how was radio used? How was the repeater used in those cases?
So one of Thomas's neighbors that lives down the road, his name is Ed. His call sign N4EDX. He was instrumental in the first few days.
He was incredible.
He lived at the bottom of what they call this bee tree neighborhood. Thomas lives kind of north towards the top, and Thomas was kind of stuck. He couldn't get out because of just how bad it was. But Ed was able to get out, and he was instrumental. And they set up airdrops, helicopters at the local Harley Davidson dealer, which Ed lives not too far away from. And in those early days, not so much Saturday or Sunday, but starting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, private helicopters, people that owned private helicopters were coming in and delivering aid. And Thomas called on the radio one day and said, "Hey, Dan, can we get a drop at the top of the mountain? Because, yeah, you're bringing it to the bottom, but we can't get to it." So that's how, me not living there and even knowing Thomas's neighborhood, it started to really sink in at that point in time. Like, okay, we got people on top of the mountain that are stuck just as much as the people on the bottom of the mountain.
Yeah, our road is 2 miles long. The road I live on, the lower part's at about 2,200 feet. The upper part's at about 3,300 feet. So it's 1,000 feet of elevation change over about 3/4 of a mile, by the way. So it's switchbacks, really, really strong.
Oh, wow.
Going up. And we had, on my driveway, which is about 1/10 of a mile long, I had probably 25 trees down on it. We got hit really hard up here on this part with winds because we had a couple small tornadoes, and we're talking about an area that never has tornadoes ever. They're just never reported here. It's not a thing, but we had a couple come through. So about 85% of the 22 households here on the upper part of our road had trees on them, on the homes. So getting down the road was really difficult. Our road washed away from the creek that runs alongside the road, completely washed away both sides of one part of the road. And then trees were down, power lines were down. You know how you're always taught, like, don't ever try to cross a power line?
Right.
Literally today, we are still, every day I'm driving and walking across power lines here because they're down, and that hasn't been the focus, cleaning them up. The focus has been restoring power, and they're having to put new power lines up. Then our bridge that connects us to the wider community, it was out. So we had the day that I went into town with a mountain bike after the storm, I had to take my mountain bike across basically a log going over the creek, which was really dodgy. But But it was so like a lot of, as Dan was saying, a lot of mountain communities were really cut off, and Dan did such a phenomenal job as net control. I can't believe he's never had experience with it, because he did a phenomenal job. But it was so funny, actually, Josh, because I don't know, it was a couple of weeks ago, I was watching one of your videos, and what Dan was describing earlier about needing a helicopter drop, we were having community meetings up here at the top of our road every day. And we had a little community meeting. We were saying, what do we need? You know, what's going on? And we all decided we really need a helicopter drop up here, because we're missing out on everything, because it's taken down the road, almost 2 miles down the road, and we don't even know it's there. We don't even hear the helicopters come in. And I said, let me go back to my shack and hop on the radio and just ask, who knows?
Sure.
Maybe they can help, maybe they can't. And I got on, got Dan on the line, and just mentioned what I needed. And then the next thing I know, the Swannanoa Fire Department, which was our main emergency coordination center here for this area, N4DIN, Dennis, who's located there at the fire department, he just answered. And I said, we need a helicopter drop here. I don't know who to contact, but I don't even know we can do it, sort of thing. And then Dennis kind of said, hey, Thomas, we got you covered. We'll set it up for you. And that was it. That's all it took.
Wow.
And even if I had, if you were using email or text messaging or something, how would you ever get a message through to the person you needed?
Or how do you know who that person is? That's what I brought up in my video, is radio kind of helped us, or helped you guys get to the right people, because if it's a phone number and the phones are down and there's an email and you don't know who to email. So Dan, help me decipher that, because in an emergency situation, particularly for like CERT and ARES and RACES, they talk about hams coordinating with like an EOC, right? Like an emergency ops center. So with this disjointed nature of the disaster, where were people meeting up to coordinate these drops? And then how did ham radio get connected to that?
Every area had their own little coordination area. We running the net on the 190 machine, we had no coordination with the state EOC. We had no coordination with any Oxcom, nothing. At one point, we were being asked for some information, but at that point, we said, we're 24, 48 hours into this. We have pages and pages of notes. We're doing a fine job. We don't need your help now. And so we never had any official help from any state agency. Here in Iredell County, things started moving forward with our local EOC. And SZF, Jim, he was working with our local ARES and invited me to work in our local EOC on Sunday. And what we found was it was ran better in our homes, because we had nicer equipment, right?
Well, you probably have a box higher up in the air than they did, right? Your footprint was massive. I don't think there was anybody who had the capability that you all had, right?
That is correct. And we just found it worked better. So starting on Monday, we came back to my home shack, and that's where we ran it for the next 9-10 days.
So with regards to the airdrops, you might not have been connected directly to EOC or an EOC, but was there some way of getting the information out of who needed the aid and where they kind of needed it that was facilitated by someone you did?
Later. I found this information out later, and it was just the day that I met Thomas here about 2 weeks ago. I met with the repeater owner that day as well, who I had never met, and we went out to lunch, and he goes, Dan, you don't realize what you were doing. We were all listening, coordinating these airdrops. I had no idea. When people said they needed things, they were listening on their end, and they had those connections with these private helicopter pilots to start bringing things in.
So you're almost like it was a beacon, if you will. This party line. That's a way to put it, they would put out these beacon calls saying, we're at some church, or we're at the Harley-Davidson parking lot, we need XYZ, and then stuff would show up, right? Is that kind of what was happening?
And it was funny, because we were sitting there having lunch at one of my favorite spots over by Thomas's house that miraculously survived. He was telling me this, and I was getting goosebumps knowing that, here I'm just talking to these folks, trying to give them an outlet of, hey, what do you need? We'll help you. And what's your location? Do you have water? Do you have this type of stuff? And they were listening, writing that
Wow.
all down and giving that to the private pilots. And I want to make this very clear right now. In the early days, there was no help from any agencies. There was no feds here. The state government was 24, 48 hours away. We had nothing. Everybody was on their own. And it was amazing just to see how much local people that have helicopters and airplanes that could fly in these small little airports deliver supplies. It was simply amazing.
Yeah,
It,
it was a really huge operation in terms of like it's amazing to see, especially even just a few days into it, all of these coordinated efforts happening kind of individually, but they were effective, and the repeater, I can't stress enough being on this end where really our whole community, the only way we could communicate really was through that repeater for our needs. That was the only way. It was how I did the wellness checks and all those other things. I got messages from people on the road. All that was done through the repeater. Even after we were a week into it, there's a site not too far from the Harley-Davidson site, in fact, which is just across the interstate. If you lived here, you'd know, but really close by, within a quarter of a mile of the Harley-Davidson site, a whole other site, which is basically a bunch of churches and other organizations that got together, and they have like a really big operation for distributing goods. And some of those people came up our road on ATVs and UTVs and things, and were asking to help. And they said, hey, we're just looking. We were denying them, saying, look, we're good right now. Go help other people. And they said, well, everybody's telling us that now. We don't know where to go. And I said, I'll find you places to go. And so I got a text message, and I said, I'll just make a couple calls. And so I got on the repeater, but also just listening to the repeater, you would know where supplies were needed. And then I could contact them, and then they would know where to take things. And that worked out really, really well, because after a disaster, and I think I kind of knew this beforehand, but it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe, first of all, that the cell phone service would just fail as quickly as it did.
right?
I mean,
Yeah,
really,
sure.
really, like we're how many years after Katrina? Like almost 2 decades. And you heard about that in Katrina, and you're like, yeah, we've hardened things now. And I think it varies based on the region you live in, right? But here, it went away. And we didn't have it. It was gone. It did not exist. And so you had no wired internet, no power, and no cell phone service. So really, amateur radio was the only way that you could communicate out.
You kind of almost got knocked back to the Stone Age where you only had radios to bring everybody back. So great question, particularly this repeater was kind of at a high vantage point. How did it survive, and how did it keep running? What were you guys doing?
So the repeater itself, as I said, sits at 6,600 and some feet.
Mm-hmm.
It's at a very secure site. This is a government site.
All right.
We're really the repeater owner is very lucky to be where he's at, and it's only because of Franklin Graham. People probably know his name from Billy Graham, the Reverend.
Oh wow.
That he's at that site because he was threatened to get out, but Franklin Graham stepped in and said no, and that's the only reason they're still there.
That's amazing, because I mean, I don't even want to think about what would happen if that repeater was not in place. That's crazy.
It was the only repeater that was up. There was an Asheville repeater, Spivey Mountain or something like that, close to Asheville, that came back up. But in the early days, this was the only repeater.
Yeah, because if you think about most of the repeater sites, just like the cell phone sites, trying to get to them when you have so many trees down on it, it just takes forever to dig your way through all the trees to get up to it to do any kind of repair work. But this Mount Mitchell site, after, because it was, Dan and I had just met with Randy, the repeater owner, just recently, and hearing him talk about just kind of how robust it is up there, what they've got going on. It's ideal. And the thing that blew my mind, I don't know if it did for you too, Dan, was he told the power output of that repeater. Now, keep in mind, Dan was 100 miles away working this repeater. And I do this routinely from Hickory, which is probably 65, 70 miles away or something. I can hit it with an HT in Hickory, right? 5 watts is the output power of that repeater. 5 watts.
At the antenna, 5 watts, yep.
Has a huge footprint.
But was there a gas backup? Did it never lose main power?
any three-letter agency you could think of has a repeater up there,
Yeah.
and it's all backed up with solar, gasoline. There, I guess by what I understand, it's hundreds and hundreds of gallons of backups up there.
Okay, I was gonna say that's yeah. Because so was somebody like living up there to keep these tanks topped off, or what were they doing? Because it's not impossible to get to. It's just
It
a
was
huge
impos-
tank.
It was impossible
probably.
at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe by helicopter, but like the road, the Blue Ridge Parkway is the main way that you get up to that part of Mount Mitchell. Because Mount Mitchell, for people who don't know, is that repeater sits at the highest point east of the Mississippi River. So it's the highest point in eastern North America.
Okay.
And really the Blue Ridge Parkways to get up there is the only way to get up there. And Blue Ridge Parkway had huge landslides and debris flows and things coming off of it, tons of trees down. You couldn't have gone up that road. There's no way.
Yeah.
So, but they, like Dan said, they had fuel. These things it was very secure.
So I have a bunch of questions I want to get to more about radio, but I got to go back to the kind of human aspect of this. The spontaneity of kind of people jumping in, including yourself, Thomas, to like go check on people and all that stuff. Why do you think everybody kind of jumped in and then used the radio to coordinate? Was it because they knew that nobody was really coming and they kind of had to do this on their own and they jumped in place? What do you think?
Well, I think in especially Saturday and Sunday, people started to be thirsty, right?
Sure.
There was no water, none. So the first water drop to come into Buncombe County, which is where Asheville is, where Thomas is, was 48 hours after. I mean, think
Wow.
about that. In
That's
48
huge.
hours, a truck driver could drive from here to Texas, and we couldn't get from one side of the state to the other with water. And to this day, it upsets me. But and there was roads opened coming in from the south to get into Asheville and these other areas. So it's a point that I'll never let go, believe me. So people were starting to be, hey, I need to survive.
Yeah.
Let's get a radio. Let's get some sort of communication. When people started bringing out amateur radio, it flourished because there was now an outlet to get to somebody, because there was no other outlet but us. I mean, that was it. I mean, that's really what it boils down to.
And I can tell you that, yeah, and immediately after, just even in our neighborhood, and I would say that we're lucky that this neighborhood I live in, this 1 mile long stretch of road at the top of the mountain, we're pretty self-sufficient people up here. Almost everybody is. Like everybody has a couple of chainsaws. We have tractors. We have ATVs, UTVs. We're so fortunate. We realized during this, because we have like an incredible mechanic and diesel mechanic up here. We have a machine shop that someone has in their at their house.
Okay.
We have like 3 trackhoe operators. We have, we're self-sufficient and pretty level-headed. And we are used to power outages because this is not a place that the power company jumps on first. When there's a power outage, we're like the last one. So we're all kind of like always ready for that stuff. And so really food-wise, water-wise, all those things, we were kind of set with that. But the thing I noticed almost immediately when we started connecting with neighbors were all of the rumors that started, because there was no communication. There was no verification of anything. And so there were just lots and lots of rumors about like lots of looting in town. I mean, people were telling about the destruction and everything. And I remember going into town on my bike, like exactly 48 hours after the storm, which is really the fastest I could get out to do that on my mountain bike with a friend here. There was no evidence of any of that stuff. It was just evidence of destruction from the flood. But I was expecting complete lawlessness based on what I had heard. And I didn't really believe that.
Sure.
But it was nice to go back up and say, hey, it's not that bad. And I realized then I was like, we've got to get some radios throughout the community. So I luckily have like a lot of other hams, like quite a few HTs hanging around. And so I just like programmed them, locked them, handed them out to people down our road so we could all communicate. And it was huge just to be able to get that instant communication again going.
Do you think that helped bring down the rumors somewhat?
Oh, yeah.
Because
Big
without
time.
communication, people are just going to come up with all kinds of ideas in their
Big
head.
time.
So that did help. And were these FRS radios, GMRS radios? What was it?
Well, they started out with FRS radios. They weren't working very well, and that's the
Sure.
reason I jumped in and I got all my amateur radio HTs out. So we had a simplex frequency on 147 555, and that's kind of like our family one we've used forever in my family, because my wife and daughters are all licensed, and we just used that one for the whole road. It ended up being really the frequency that was used for most of Swannanoa.
Oh, wow.
To kind of coordinate. And I could hear all the way down through, here my antenna works all the way, like almost probably 10 or more miles away, from the house easily. But it really had a huge impact just for people to be able to talk and communicate and know what's going on. It dispels all of those rumors, because rumors are just it's just your kind of panic reflex after something like this has happened. Because the one thing I also learned, just communications is a mess, both kind of interpersonal, like when you're trying to figure things out, and also this broader macro scale of like MCOM and everything. Everything has to kind of like filter and get into place. But what really surprised me was just how quickly amateur radio came in, and Dan jumping in and making such an organized place for people to pass traffic. It was huge.
Yeah, I should reiterate all the comments saying how great of a net op Dan ended up being. Dan, so if anybody doesn't know this, this is a really weird situation, because you all were living with no communication except for this one repeater, and that repeater was on Broadcastify, and so we're listening out. I'm listening from California to what you guys are experiencing and the archive system that exists on Broadcastify, and I'm going back and listening to some of the communications. And Dan, I got to say, hands off to you. You did a fantastic job as a net op. And so I think everybody in the chat agrees. But it's such a weird. It was almost surreal, like I'm watching an aquarium, because
what's more surreal? What's more surreal, Josh, is me watching your video that you had about MCOM, and at the end of it, you had the audio clip where I was talking to Dan.
I know.
I fell over. I was like, "This? How did this happen?"
Because I had been listening. We on the Discord, everybody was listening. We literally have a chat room talking about this for some people that are local. We're trying to we're not helping from where we're at, but we created a Discord chat for what was going on, just so people could communicate for those that had the ability. And some of us donated stuff and all that. But it's really surreal that the only information coming in and out was this repeater almost, and a lot of rumors, right? The internet went crazy. Oh, yeah. But that repeater was still connected to the internet, so we were listening live. It was very surreal from my point of view, and particularly hearing you all talk.
So the funny thing about that Broadcastify was that the person, there was actually quite a bit of confusion in the first couple of days, because the person that put the Broadcastify feed out was actually another repeater closer to me, but his repeater was having a mechanical issue, and he took the repeater off the air and switched his Broadcastify feed that he has on his repeater over to the N2GE repeater.
Okay.
And that's where that confusion got. And I always felt bad for Randy, because he didn't get the credit in the early days of his repeater. It was another repeater. But that gentleman was really gracious. I talked to him a bunch of times, and as soon as Randy was able to get everything back up on his end, they switched it back over.
It's kind of amazing, the archival aspect of this. This is people will be poring over this for years, listening to like some of the traffic that played out over time. But yeah, I got to move on some of these questions, otherwise we're going to keep talking about a lot of this stuff. So for both of you, what were some of the surprising things that you learned from this, kind of on the back end here, radio wise or other? What was surprising?
Well, I can tell you two just off the top of my head. One of them I didn't learn until I did an interview with one of the local news stations out of Charlotte. There was a family traveling up into the mountains, and I'm sorry, I don't know where. They were coming from Alabama. They were listening to us on Broadcastify the entire time, and the North Carolina DOT had put on Google Maps all these roads that were closed because they were trying to stop traffic from getting into these areas. And we were able to tell people that were trying to get there to help, hey, don't listen to Google Maps. These roads are actually open. You can take this road. And, we were giving directions, even though the roads, it said online, they were closed. And this family was listening to all this, and they were able to get to their 80-year-old grandfather because they
Wow.
were listening to us. Even they didn't know how they were going to get there because they said the roads were closed, but they were listening to me. No, they're actually open. So that was pretty cool. And then back to the story with Randy at lunch that day, the repeater owner. I'm just trying to help people, and little did I know in the back end they were doing helicopter drops with the info that we were getting from the folks in the field. You
Everybody
know,
was listening.
yeah, it was
We
just,
were all
Yep.
listening.
you know, it's it's just amazing to see how people from all over the country came together. You know,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me too, one of the really surprising things was, and especially this is kind of like, retroactively looking back at it, and after Dan and I had met with our friends there, and I was thinking about it later, just how quickly the amateur radio kind of MCOM network came together in this, this volunteer way, like Dan jumping on there. People were in the right places. I mean, we had somebody at our fire department. I had Ed down our road. I learned of like 2 new amateur radio operators not too far away during this process. And I don't think any of us were crazy well versed in jumping in and deploying MCOM, like this, but it all kind of worked out. And I think it's because amateur radios operators, if you've checked into nets, if you've done things like this, you've participated in field day, you kind of understand how traffic works. You understand the courtesy of how to use it. And then you had to learn to explain it to people who are non-hams, because you're going to get ready to hand them a radio and say, hey,
Sure.
I need you to report this on the repeater when you get there. Don't worry about a call sign. They're not going to ask you about it, but this is what you need to do. And it was really I wrote, I think, in one of my very first update posts on qrpeer.com, I wrote on there that like amateur radio really is like a superpower during this. And I was able to make those. I should say I was really unique on our road. Our family was. We had just installed solar power on our house along with 2 Tesla power walls earlier this year. And so we never actually lost power at our house.
Wow.
And in fact, we ended up having basically, and we had HughesNet satellite service here through their new high-speed service, and we'd only installed that, I think, in February. So we had internet. I didn't have any mobile phone, anything. And so, and we had power. And so we kind of became like this internet cafe for our entire road that would come up here. We actually made like a cafe area outside. Because I mean, during these times, you've got to make the most of what you have and what you do. And it got our community together and stuff. But it was, the whole experience was just kind of surreal how quickly all that, pieced together. And, I don't know. I've always kind of, sometimes I've gotten skeptical of the amateur radio world, thinking, are we really even, practicing for emergency communications? You hear all these people, is it relevant anymore? And I remember, like I said, Katrina, almost 2 decades ago.
Right.
And you're kind of thinking, well, surely amateur radio is not relevant anymore, but by golly, it was there and it worked and it was impressive.
It gives me the Mr. Miyagi wax on, wax off practice that you said, like, you check into a net, you do field day, and you said you're not really Aries or Races connected as far as emergency. But when it comes down to, hey, we got a repeater with a wicked footprint, and we can talk to everybody in the affected zone and even outside that zone for coordination, and look what we could do with it, which, I mean, it's very impressive hearing all this. So let's hit on the non-licensed thing. So it's been mentioned a couple of times now. Yeah, let's just get out there. I know everybody in the chat.
Break. I'll be right back.
Yeah. So, I think let's take it from the point that Thomas made, that there was rumors abound, and the internet also got some of these rumors, and there was a lot of commentary on non-licensed people in an emergency situation transmitting. So there's the first part. And then the second part was that there were some ham radio operators that were telling non-licensed people to get off the repeaters, not necessarily yours that you were working on, or off the air. How much of this is true? How much of this is real? Break it down as far as you want to go.
We had multiple non-licensed hams on the repeater, hands down. The very first day, Saturday, somebody came in and said, hey, I'm not licensed, but I need this. And you can go back and listen to the archive. I said, I don't care if you're licensed or not. Tell us what you need. We're gonna help you as best as we can. I come from a law enforcement and a fire department background. Sometimes, as all my supervisors over the years have said, rules are rules until those rules are meant to be broken.
That's right.
And and I understand the FCC's point, and this was considered emergency. So, Part 90 says we can do it even after the emergency was over. This was such a devastating storm. I didn't care. And 2 weeks after the storm, when cell phone service was back up in some spots, we still had a local VFW. These guys were out in the field doing search and rescue. In some of the areas they went, people that aren't from this area don't understand the terrain here. You can have a cell phone tower 300 feet away, but you're on the other side of the mountain of it. You have no cell phone service.
Right.
So their only comms was their Bofang radio, that somebody handed to them. And I didn't care. Well, there was a lot of unlicensed operation, and
is there?
I'll go down saying I did the right thing.
And I was responsible for handing out a lot of those unlicensed the radios to those unlicensed operators because, frankly, and all of us, I don't know of anyone living here who was dealing with all of this who hesitated for a moment to share amateur radio with non-licensed people during this because you needed to communicate, and it worked. It expanded the community really quickly. It was what we needed.
So not to say it didn't happen, but the claim that there was a ham radio operator that told a bunch of people that were unlicensed to get off the repeater or get off the simplex frequency. Did you experience that? And sure, you're not everywhere,
I didn't.
But so you didn't see that at all?
No.
Okay.
There was nobody that ran the net but me for the first 11 days. And so there were a few times in those 11 days I had handed off for a half an hour to an hour because I had, when this started really getting rolling, I had state officials calling me, local officials calling me. So there were times I had to step away and I would hand it off to, certain people to continue when I had to take these important calls. Right. But at no point in time did we ever tell anybody to get off the air. Now, I will tell you that there were 2 incidents on the radio. We had a gentleman that jumped in, said that he was with a search and rescue team, that they were on the ground and they were out there pulling bodies. Well, anybody that is emergency services wouldn't say that over the air anyway. Right. So we knew he was false, and I told him to get off the air. And then we had some other guy that came in, gave a call sign. I looked it up. It was expired by a couple of years. And he said that, when is the government went into DEFCON 9 and everything's now on. I mean, he was talking all this crap. Who knows what it even was, And I told him, stay off the air while we're working. These were people that were just trying to cause an issue.
So even in a disaster, you still have the crazies out there, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
So interesting question from Frank, and we'll take some questions if you type in @Ham Radio Crash Course in the chat or have the word question in your comment. I'll try and get the questions, but I got a couple more I want to hit. But Frank says, question for all you guys: do you think that you got some new licenses out of this? The people that are local, do they see the value now?
Oh yeah. Just right here in my county, and like I said, we're 100 miles outside the hardest hit areas. Yeah. The Iredell County Amateur Radio Society, their class is full. They don't ever fill up, and they start, I think it's next Thursday or Tuesday or something like that. They're filled. There's no more room. And I get emails all the time still today. Hey, I just got my license. Thank you. I listened to you on Broadcastify. And these are coming from all over the country.
That's amazing.
Yeah, two of the people that I handed out HTs to are interested in becoming amateur radio operators now, and I mean that's a really good. Actually a really good percentage. And I mean, to be honest, after all of this, I spoke with so many people, during and after this, and people kind of learned what amateur radio was. Even the people that were coming up to help, like National Guard, just tons of other small organizations, churches, all these people, all these volunteers that would come up our road to help with different things. I would kind of mention search and rescue people. I'd mention them. I was an amateur radio operator and so on and so forth. And they're like, I've really thought about getting my license now. I knew about this. And you can see it really does shine in a situation like this.
Oh, yeah, this is a pretty unique situation. The cell phones going down in particular is I'm with you, Thomas. I did not expect that. The fact that that happened, that's like worst possible case scenario.
Let's put this into a little bit of perspective.
Yeah, please.
The reason they went down, it's not because just the power was out. It's the landslides.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
All these towers are connected by fiber, and the fiber was ripped away. I always make this a point to tell people listening to these interviews that I've been doing. You have to realize the terrain here. Mount Mitchell is at 6,600 feet, the highest point. Well, the lowest point in the mountain sits at about 1,500 feet down in the Lake Lure area of North Carolina. As the air flies, it's only probably 30, 45 miles, maybe 40 miles, Thomas?
Yep.
But road-wise, to get there, you're talking like an hour and a half to get there.
Yep.
When they got over 30 inches of rain up on Mount Mitchell, so all that rain at 6,000 plus feet could only go downward.
That's right.
Right into Lake Lure. And everybody has seen online, if you're on TikTok and Facebook, everything you've seen is Chimney Rock and Lake Lure. And they were especially hit hard because while everything went through Swannanoa right through Thomas, it ended. Everything that was washed away from Thomas's neighborhood ended up in Lake Lure. That area was extremely hit hard as well. So you got to understand just the terrain to see the true devastation of, millions and millions of gallons of water flowing down thousands of feet at high speed. And it took everything.
Yeah, 30 inches of rain is no joke, no matter how you stack it, particularly if you have terrain like that. It's the fast-moving water that sounds like really did the damage. That's what took everything out from what I understand. So let's dispel another rumor maybe. Question from Joel. I heard Aries didn't activate because it wasn't enough of an emergency. Is that accurate, or did it get activated?
No. So I'm going to dispel this right now because I'll be the first one to admit I was very upset about all this. So Aries is operated at a local level. Every county has or should have their own Aries group, and they are activated at the local level only. They're not activated by the state or a town. They're activated by the county that they're in, okay? That's the way Aries works. Where I was really upset was with Oxcom. I said, well, where the heck are they? This is their shining moment. Where are they? You train for weeks sometimes months at a time with these, get your certification for Oxcom. Where are you? Well, I was wrong. Plain and simple. And I had no problem calling them out on the radio, and when people asked me about it, and I did a few times. Well, I got schooled really fast by one of those important phone calls I took, and it was from the director of Oxcom here in North Carolina. And he's like, I don't have a problem with what you're doing, but let me educate you first, and your tune will change, and it did. Oxcom is activated at the state level. They work with first responders on boots on the ground. They are not in an amateur radio support setting. They are required to be amateur radio operators in case they have to fall back to amateur radio, but their main objective is not amateur radio. And so I was schooled really fast, and I apologized to that man because I did call them out saying, hey, where are y'all? And they were active, just not where we thought they should be active. But as for Aries, that gentleman that just asked that question, Aries is activated at the local level, and to my knowledge, most people, or most counties, I should say, had their Aries activated.
So for Oxcom, they have their own radio services that they use, right? So you never heard them. They were just doing their own thing.
Viper system.
Got it. Okay. So that system didn't go down.
There were multiple towers that did go down, but they worked on them very fast.
Got it. Okay. That's very good. We'll take a couple of questions, but this is my big one for both of you. Knowing what you know now, what kind of a radio setup either portable or for home or both, would you recommend people consider? Now, of course, we don't all live in the same geographic situations, the same disaster profiles and risk, but what would you recommend people have if you were faced with similar situation?
So I can tell you on my end, it was kind of interesting because here at the house, I've never been, I'm an HF guy, primarily a QRP guy for the most part, and CW. So I don't do a lot of VHF, UHF, but only in the past couple of months, I've been interested in exploring APRS a little bit more again. And I was looking to put VHF, UHF radios in our cars that I'd never completely done because both of my daughters will be driving soon and going off to college next year and everything. And I wanted to have those all outfitted. So I thought I'd test some radios, and I got a Yaesu FTM 500DR. And I brought it into the shack, hooked it up to my external dual band diamond antenna outside. And what a great thing that was, because I actually have, so we've got this solar battery system on the house anyway for our whole house. But I also have I think a 30 amp hour battery floating between, its power source and my radio, so that I even have like more backup on this radio. But I would recommend for anyone who has a home setup that it's really important to have dual receivers that can receive simultaneously. And I'd never had that before this radio. But what we had here at the house was so important because my wife, my two daughters K4 GRL and K4 TLI, and my wife K4 MOI, they all manned this radio when I was out chainsawing, working with neighbors, doing all this stuff. I would take an HT with me. They stayed here to take all the traffic on the Mitchell repeater, to note anything that would be important to us, to also make requests from neighbors when neighbors would ask, like what grocery stores are open? Is there a pharmacy open? That was like some of the very first questions were, is there a pharmacy open? Where can we get gas? Is a grocery store open? And so they were manning that, and I could so easily show them how to switch between the VFOs to know when they're talking on simplex and when they're talking on the repeater with this radio, because that's pretty easy on this radio. And we could hear the simplex frequency at the same time we could hear the repeater, so you didn't miss anything. So really, to me, that being able to have dual receivers that receive simultaneously is really important in your home setup. And I think it's also very important to actually have a home setup with an external antenna. Made a huge difference for our road, because if I only had an HT, there's no way I could have easily reached Ed N4EDX 4 miles away, because there's a lot of terrain between us, even if it's only 4 miles away. What Dan was saying earlier is so true. Mount Mitchell is only 6 miles as the crow flies from my house, but it takes me almost an hour to drive there, because it's just a lot of terrain to go around to get there. Sure. So, having a proper home system, a dual band radio, is important. And then with HTs, I was telling some friends this recently, that you don't want to have an HT that's precious. Like when you take this thing to the field, like I had an HT on me when I was chainsawing, when I was moving things, when I was ripping carpet out for people, just on an ATV, on a UTV, hanging on the back of it, whatever, doing things all the time. So you're going to drop it. It's going to get scratched up. Don't worry about it. You just need one that's durable. And I used our whole family has these FT60Rs.
Oh yeah,
and
FT60.
Solid,
there it is. Yep.
Built like a tank. Worked really well, and you want a decent antenna on it. Don't go with the rubber ducky, because here where we are, we have terrain, and so this makes a really big difference when you're up and down the road. So, that's the. I think it's probably important too to think about having a mobile installation too, because when you are able to go out, just like Ed was able to do N4EDX, he has a great mobile installation in his car. He also carried HTs with him that he was handing out to people that needed them, and I was able to hear him all over the place here from my house in simplex when I needed to, which was great.
I love the AB channel, VHF,
Mhm.
UHF radio, that you can monitor your simplex frequency. The one that basically you said you propagated that, people were on the air, but then you
Yeah.
also had a solid repeater that you were able to communicate with and make sure you're pulling traffic in from that. I love that. It's a good tip.
Mhm.
What antenna were you using?
The one that I have here on the house is a diamond. It's like the diamond that everybody has,
Sure.
the dual band diamond, and I can't
The
think of the model number
collinear
now.
with the spikes in the
Yeah.
bottom. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or
Yes.
the ground plate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was. The funny thing was the second day, like I said, 48 hours afterwards, a neighbor and I took our mountain bikes down into town, mainly because we needed to find some medicines for one of our elderly neighbors up here. She
Wow.
needed some antibiotics for a tooth problem that she had. And so we went into town, and I took my HT with me, and one of my daughters was pretty much manning the shack or the shack mobile unit here, the 500DR. And I talked to her all the way down, and my round trip was 20 miles,
Wow.
with about
Yeah.
1,000 feet of elevation change,
Yeah, that's
down and back up. Right? It
sure.
wasn't just playing around, but I was able to communicate with her the entire time. I was
Wow.
totally amazed because I'd never checked the footprint from here, because it's up pretty high, but we also have some pretty high ridge lines around us. So I'd never really tested that, but it worked really well. And you need a few people with mobile systems like this, our home, like a proper external antenna, which also Ed had down, 4 miles away from here. And so we were easily able to communicate simplex that way. Also, I would say the HF, people ask me about HF. I did do a little HF. All of my antennas came down because we had so many trees come down. We had trees on our house. We had trees everywhere. And my Subaru that I was going to install this radio in, it is RIP. it's gone over the Rainbow Bridge, unfortunately,
The
because
Subaru?
yes,
The
this
Subaru is gone.
it is gone. The same Subaru that survived a bear attack on the inside, that survived us being rear-ended by somebody on I-40 earlier this year, got it fixed up, and the first tree hit it, and I looked outside the window. The first tree hit it. I was looking outside the window, and I was telling my wife, I was like, "Oh man, a tree hit the car," and I said, I think it'll be all right though. And then we heard another tree crash down, and I looked at it, I was like, it didn't make it. Like really smashed the front of it really badly. But like, oh, it was just, I mean, it's like that was such a small thing. And all of this. I will say this for anybody that goes through something like this, it's terrifying. It's terrifying to hear trees crashing all around you. And it looks, the woods around our house, we live surrounded by forests. I can walk to Pisgah National Forest from my house. We have protected lands all around us that neighbor our house, and it's so different. It just looks different outside. So many trees are down, and it was daunting. To look out and to see actually just how much needed to be chainsawed. Now our neighborhood came together, we worked together, and we cleared the road, we cleared our driveways in fairly short order, faster than I would have ever guessed. But it took us probably 5 days to have a viable path down the road. And then we had to repair the bridge, which we did. Basically another friends of friends that had a construction company came out and fixed our bridge. A week or two later, it got certified by the Kentucky Department of Transportation, because we have people from all over here doing things, still doing things here from all over. And that's how it all worked. Just everybody coming in and doing a little something and fixing things up.
That's amazing. Everybody go sub to K4SWL on YouTube right now for the sake of his Subaru. He needs your support, guys. Go check him out. Help him out.
I love that Subaru so much, too.
What Subaru was it? Was it a Forester,
it's
Outback?
A 2018 Forester. And I had taken that car in places that you wouldn't think you could take a car. It was a machine. And we're probably going to replace it with just something a couple years younger. But I want my daughters. They really like Subaru. So
sure. So, Dan, same question to you. Knowing what you know now, what would you recommend people, like a home station, and let's go with portable, man-portable, whatever. You take it where you want to go. What would you recommend?
So we talked a little bit before the show started about my thinking on equipment, and I do not enjoy the Chinese portables. I think they may have their place, But if you're going to buy a $25 radio and think it's going to work for you and perform for you to save your life, well, you're going to get $25 performance. And that's the way I think of it. I understand everybody has a budget, but that radio that Thomas just held up, the FT60 Yaesu, I've had one of those radios for the better part of 15 years, and that thing still works today.
Mine too.
They're built like a tank. I'm a big ICOM guy. I always have been, and most of my shack consists of ICOM and Motorola stuff. But you want to, if you're into HF, you definitely want to have yourself a good HF radio. And in this type of situation, 2 meters, in my opinion, is going to be better than the 440 just because of the way it travels compared to 440 with the signal loss. But stick with the Motorola, Kenwood, ICOM, those types of radios. And the most important thing I think of, you have to know how to program your radio. All these new people today, I hear it on the radio. Well, can I buy the RT systems or can I use Chirp? Program your darn radio with your hand. All right? Because when the hits the fan,
when the hurricane hits North Carolina,
you're not going to be able to program that, so learn how to use your radio. Here at the house, I have a Diamond X510 up on top of the roof at about 45 feet, and then multiple HF antennas, vertical and horizontal antennas. That's the nice thing about amateur radio. Anybody tells you you're doing something wrong, they're not a ham, because there's so many different facets of this hobby. But, the one thing I will stress is, go buy yourself your beginner radio if you want to buy your Quashan radio, whatever it is. But save your money and buy yourself something that, one, is going to be user programmable easily. And two, if you drop it off your hip, it's not going to crash into 10 pieces. Get yourself something of quality.
Well, you said...
Dan, I was going to say, Dan brought up such an important point, and that is you do not want to learn to use your radio during a disaster.
Yes, good point.
Need to
Great point.
Have if you've got a dozen HTs, learn to use one of them really, really well. Like, you need to know how to, as Dan said, you need to be able to field program it. It's just important. Like, for me, I was putting in 2 different VFOs or memory channels with the simplex frequency, the repeater frequency, and I had to do it on my radios consistently, the ones I was handing out to people. And you need to be able to do that by hand on the radio. The other thing that I would do differently that I didn't do this time, but I'm going to be prepared for next time, is to have USB-C charging cables for your radios.
Nice.
And I learned from my buddy George, KJ6VU, on the ham radio, on the ham radio workbench podcast. We were talking about this, and he had pointed out the fact that you can get those USB cables pretty easily, actually, to make it so you can USB charge them.
Oh, the PD,
which will help.
Power delivery.
Yeah.
The PD cables? Yes, indeed.
And that's important mainly for other people that you might give HTs to as well, because if they don't have a generator at their house, they can probably still charge them up in their car or something like that.
Right.
And I was about to speak to this and forgot, but like all of my HF antennas went down. I did do a little HF operating. People asked about that. It was primarily simplex, though, to people using a NIVIS antenna here locally that I just wanted to connect with, and they were not within the footprint. Well, we didn't want to use the Mount Mitchell repeater for that. We could have, but we didn't want to use it. And so I used HF for that. And of course, like when you do anybody out there, and I'm sure there's like tons of them in your audience who do Parks on the Air and Summits on the Air, throwing up an HF antenna at the house takes all of like 5 minutes when you need to put up a new one. So just throw up an antenna, get it on the air. And that was kind of fun. But really, VHF was the band of choice there.
You brought up another point there that I want to touch on, because very early on in this talk tonight, you had said, Josh, that something about, I'm drawing a blank on how you said it, but something about working with the EOCs, and that this is going to be looked at for years to come, and it's going to be studied on how this net actually worked.
I think so.
Here's my suggestion to these people who run the EOCs. They were actually upset by what I have been told, just how much success that we were having on the machine, that they wanted all communication to be switched over to 40 meters. That's where they were holding the state EOC, and and he just said it. He was lucky he had power. Not
Right.
'Did not.
99.999%
That's
did
right.
not. He just said it. All his antennas went down.
Right.
It's a lot easier to pick up a handheld radio than it is to put up a 70-foot, 75-foot, 40-meter dipole. If there's something that has to be learned from this, is that you may have your policies and your protocols, but I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. Just because that's the way you were taught to do it, just because that's the policy that's in place, doesn't mean that it's not meant to be broken when it needs to be broken. You know, when I worked for one of the largest fire departments in the East Coast, my boss told me, like the very first day I was there, just because it's in that book doesn't mean you don't ever break it. If you have a good excuse why you broke that rule, I will support you 100%. And that is true to this. Do not rely on HF in a situation like this. It's stupid. You need power. You need large antennas. You need an analyzer or something to test the SWR if your radio does. Listen, you can put a rubber duck antenna you got from Amazon and the thing's going to work. You know, it's a much easier way to do things. And I think North Carolina specifically, because there are states that do this wonderful, and North Carolina is not one of them. We have to invest time, research, and money into getting a statewide repeater system like the state of Florida and other states have. When I went down to Florida for Hurricane Milton, I talked on a repeater from the moment I got into Jacksonville to the moment I got to my parents' house in Sebring, Florida, and I was heard throughout the entire state. That's a repeater system, and it works. And
Well,
I think it should be very much looked at by multiple other states as well.
well, there's kind of a takeaway I've taken from hearing your stories here is that if you go with this, you know, the first responders who are coming in as outsiders, it's what it sounds like a little bit. Yeah, they've got their own plan they got to run, but that plan I think leaves out the local people. Because, like you just said, there's no HF antennas. There's no HF infrastructure. And even then, I don't know that those people running HF would be able to work as some kind of homogenous group to care for the community and to quell the rumors and put out the information of where the airdrop might be or where they might be able to get water or wherever that stuff is. That's all going to be local communication, likely line of sight, as you've demonstrated just by explaining your situation. So I think I agree with you completely. But my joke that I was going to come up earlier is, Dan, you mentioned you're a Motorola fan. You don't want your HT to fall off your belt and break when it hits the concrete. You want your HT to fall off your belt and break the concrete when it hits the ground.
Exactly.
Right? That's the recommendation. That's what you want. That's it. That's it. I got a super chat during all this. Forrest says, it's clear ham radio has an incredible impact during these type of disasters. Thanks for sharing this story. And boy, howdy, do I agree. Do you guys have a couple of minutes? We might be able to take some questions. We didn't get a ton, and
Sure.
I'm going to put out the word. So if anybody types in at Ham Radio Crash Course or question in your comment, now's the time. We'll take a couple of them. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up here. And we're going to start the after chat. I think Thomas is going to join us for a little while. Dan, I think, might be new to Discord, so I might talk with him after that, and maybe he'll join us for a little bit. But again, you guys I think I speak for a lot of people saying your story is amazing. You were placed in a situation that you probably didn't expect to be in. But there you found yourself and you dealt with it. And I think in a way that I don't know that anybody could ask for a better response than what you all did. Thomas being kind of boots on the ground and running around and trying to make sure everybody's okay. And Dan, like you said, 11 days straight of being the net op and never really being a net op before that is one of the most impressive stories I've heard in a long time. So just kudos to both of you. Just absolutely amazing. Fantastic job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's see. Oh, yeah, please go ahead.
Something I'll say as well. Thank you for that, by the way. You can train, you can have the plans, but when something of this magnitude happens, it really goes out the window. You know, I keep saying this analogy, you know, as I said, I've been a fireman for a long, long time. FDNY is the most prestigious fire department in the world. And when they had the biggest disaster to hit their city in 2001, their plan fell apart. And no matter what the plan was here, our plan was going to fall apart if
Yep.
there was a coordinated effort in the beginning, which, we weren't coordinated, but even if we were, our plan would have fell apart. And it's not because, this area got hit. It was the entire area that got hit. The people who made the plans were hit. It's a little bit different of a story when it's so many people. And lastly, I'll say there's one thing that really helped through all this. And I'm not going to get political with it, but Elon Musk and his ability to create such an awesome, awesome Starlink system. This is an amazing technology. I am so thankful. One was gifted to me after the storm by a wonderful ham radio operator out of Florida. That is a really neat technology that brought all these hard hit areas back online, and were able to get the help they needed from not only their local 911 centers and their fire departments, EMS, and police departments, but their local citizens who didn't have access to amateur radio to be able to contact their loved ones. So I don't want to plug that, but I tell you, it's a really a neat technology that more people should check into.
And,
Yeah, I was
piggybacking
very
on that,
impressed.
there's one thing I want to add that people don't think, I didn't think about. This was something that I want to spread the word on. If you're ever in a situation like this where you've had a natural disaster or something that's taken out your cell phones and your cell phone towers and all those sites, you really need to have Wi-Fi calling enabled on your phone. I'd never had that enabled. And the problem was, even though we had Wi-Fi here at the house because we had an internet connection, I couldn't engage it because you really have to it has to pick up your EIN number or whatever off of the cell phone tower when you engage that to set up the 911 system and everything. And you had to go find a tower. So it took me like a week before I could actually get to a spot where I could get some cell phone service. And that was probably one of the Verizon pop-up things that they did that I was able to piggyback on. And because I didn't have cell phone service, I didn't have texting. And because I didn't have texting, I couldn't do two-factor authentication for a lot of sites. And I mean, you think about your insurance, you want to file insurance claim, your bank, all these other things. We run an Airbnb, and I wasn't able to get into the Airbnb system at all without doing two-factor authentication through text messages only. Wow. And so that's something to think about. Another thing that Dan had mentioned that I think is really important, I had a person ask me not too long after the storm came, and they said, why didn't you guys just evacuate? Well, there were no evacuation orders here, right? We were expecting it to be a bad storm. We were expecting flooding in the low-lying areas. We were expecting some high winds. My house is built to a 130 mile per hour wind spec because we live above 3,000 feet, and that's required here. The trees around our house we've been careful to make sure that the ones that could possibly fall in the house were gone. Yes, some still hit the house, but they didn't, not the bulk of them. It's just like the top of them. We did everything we could, and we were ready, but what happened was not something that anybody thought would happen. The meteorologists who warned about it, they knew it could be bad, but this was actually worse in places than they could have imagined. The combination of how it all came together was just, as people described it, as kind of biblical destruction in places like these debris flows, and places like Chimney Rock, that area, Lake Lure area, where the culmination of all these waters, all these things coming in at once just kind of wiped things off the planet. And so we're still 5 weeks on, we're still having issues, and North Carolina is a fairly well-off state, but to do this is it's a huge effort. And so don't ever think that you live in a place where things like this can't happen, because we were definitely never on the radar of a dangerous place to live. We never have been here. We don't have big storms. We don't have things like this. It was crazy. So don't think that you're immune to it wherever you live. Be ready for it.
Yeah, good point. All right, let's take a couple of questions and then we'll wrap things up. So George asks, what was the turnaround time to restore power? We talked about that in the beginning. There's still areas without power right now, right?
Oh yeah, most of Buncombe County's back with power now, by my understanding, where Thomas is.
Mhm.
But the other areas that were also very hard hit up in the really remote areas of Yancey County and some of those areas are still without power. There was one particular ham I went and visited 2 weeks ago. I did a donation thing with my business. We raised a bunch of money, and my wife and I, we went out shopping, and we were able to deliver all these supplies to stranded hams. That was my goal, and that's what
Right
we
on.
did. And that,
Right
that
on.
was the day I met Thomas and other people. But just getting to this one town that I'd never even heard of is named Pensacola, North Carolina.
Oh, yeah.
It was 20 miles of off road to get
Wow.
there
Yeah.
because everything had been washed away. The roads were gone. So
Right.
you were following tracks in the mud to get where you had to go. And you're like you're praying the whole way. I hope this gets us to where we got to
Or,
go.
or you get stuck and now you got to
Yeah.
get pulled out of there. Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Mhm.
mean, yeah, those areas are still without power. Yeah.
Wow.
Mhm.
So I was waiting for a question like this to come up. I'm a repeater builder. Do we know what the specs are on the Mount Mitchell repeater? That's from KD4YDC. I think he wants to make a Mount Mitchell repeater clone.
So if he wants to shoot me an email, just get my call sign and just go to my QRZ page where my email is. But the repeater owner has told me the name of the repeater. It's more of a home built job on a certain particular chassis. I can't remember the name of it, but the repeater itself at the repeater puts out 20 watts. Then it goes through 160 feet of coax hardline
Oh,
and
wow.
up the tower. And by the time it gets to the tower, at the end of the feed line is 5 watts.
Wow. Impressive. So you got 100 feet up, or relatively 100 feet up, and it's still, you're at 6,500 feet. It's a good spot, good vantage point, obviously.
I think it's technically 6680 is what the actual.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's very good. So question, was VoIP or ROIP used at all?
Not so, other than like Wi-Fi calling, if you're talking about VoIP in terms of just normal individuals be able to like communicate with the outside world, people used Wi-Fi calling on their phones, and that was about the extent of it. There was no other VoIP that I know of that was being used.
And that was primarily done with Starlink or if you had HughesNet like yourself, correct, Thomas?
Yep.
Is the new HughesNet fast? Is that low Earth orbit
It-
too?
It is not low Earth. It's geostationary. It's a new thing they put out at the end of December last year. It is high speed. We got it because we really didn't have the views to the north and northwest that we need for Starlink here at our house. We've got some ridge lines and we had trees.
Mm-hmm.
Now maybe it's open up for it. I'm not sure, but HughesNet's geostationary and it's high speed up and down, but there's like the latency you get with geostationary. Yeah, with geostationary. But it worked fine for Wi-Fi calling, for everything. It was super reliable. I mean, never failed, and our power never failed like the entire time. I did appoint one of my daughters a power czar in the house, and she had absolute power to like unplug or turn off whatever anybody left on, because we really had to kind of watch it. We have two Powerwall batteries, and they were never intended for like 2.5 weeks of outage.
Right. Yeah.
But they worked brilliantly with we have like 10.2 kilowatts of solar on the house. And even on kind of cloudy days, we still gathered enough solar to recharge the batteries. So
Wow.
worked out really well.
That's awesome. Was there any equipment that you didn't have that you wish you did have?
I can
A
answer that on
UTV.
my end. Yeah, for you, yeah, definitely.
A UTV. I wish I had a side-by-side or something, and I didn't have
I bet. Yeah,
Yeah.
I bet. Dan, what say you?
I was using an old ICOM 746.
Oh,
and-
really?
And I had it for quite a while. I had one of my buddies do some work on it. The display went bad. But the story got out, and ICOM apparently, by what I understand, reached out to DX Engineering. DX Engineering reached out to me. I was totally shocked, surprised. How they even got my phone number, I don't know. But I was in Florida at the time. That's why I gave the net up originally, because I went down to be with my parents during Hurricane Milton. And they called me my very first day before the hurricane hit. And they're like, well, what radio do you want? We're going to send you a radio. And, I'm a pretty humble guy. You say you want a $100 HT or a nice new 9700 like they sent me in the mail. I said, well, if I'm going to do it, I don't want, they said, they made mention of, we heard you were using an old 746. And I said, yes. They're like, okay, well, let's replace that. So that opened up the pathway. All right. Now I know they're not talking about like a little HT. They're talking about a nice radio. So I said, yes, if we're going to do it, I have a nice HF radio. Why don't we do a 9700? If your equipment is starting to fail, you never know when the weather's going to move in. If it's in your budget, replace it.
Yeah.
I'm very thankful that 746 worked as well as it did, but it sits on that top shelf up there now, retired, so right where it belongs.
There you go. Yeah, you're sitting on a new 9700 now, thanks to
and
ICOM.
I'll plug DX Engineering and I'll plug ICOM. I've been an ICOM guy my whole life, and what a very nice company to do that. So thank you to both of them.
Excellent. Yeah. All right, let's see. So Roman says, can we get a video on how to make batteries to lower base stations with solar? So were you doing solar? No, because both of you had power, so you didn't really have to dip in. Did you know of any hams who had to use solar for any of their stations?
Not that I know of. I think most of the people here that I know, the hams that were here, were using gasoline generators primarily, or propane if they had propane whole house generators. Sure. I do have a lot of, because I only had this solar system installed, like I said, in April. I think that's when it was installed of this year. So I've only had it, for a few months. And I do have some deployable solar panels. We had solar on our house before that, but it was more modest. The system was more modest, but it would have also taken us through this on the radio side. It would not have powered our the rest of our house and our well pump. That's the most important thing that this powers, is the well pump. So in a way, people had also, back to this whole thing about I think it was 5 days in, the Buncombe County Sheriff's Department came up and said to everyone on our road up here, we recommend you evacuate if you're even considering evacuating, because probably by the end of the day, the road's going to crumble away to the point that you can't leave.
You won't be able to. Yeah, sure.
And like nobody on our road left because we were kind of like, we're okay up here. Because if we went into Asheville, we wouldn't have water. They didn't have water for ages in Asheville. Oh. And we most of us have some sort of power generator or something. And we also shared water. We shared resources. We did all that. So we were actually fine, during this process. But in terms of the radio stuff, I definitely had plenty of batteries, plenty of solar that I could have, charged up my batteries and my HTs and everything else on solar.
Wow. All right. Pilgrim Dav asks, was GMRS used at all?
Here I can say that it was GMRS, FRS, all of those were used. But after the emergency part of it was over and I started to take back the HTs, everybody on our road unanimously wanted an off-grid radio solution. And so we've actually put together a GMRS network now on our road. We're working on that right now. People are getting their GMRS licenses. I would like everybody to get their ham licenses, but everybody's trying to rebuild their lives and businesses right now. Like, they're not going to stop and try to get their tech, right?
Yeah.
But a GMRS license is easy to get. And N2GE, who, is the owner of the Mount Mitchell repeater, amazingly, the day that I met up with Dan a couple of weeks ago in person, and our other friends, Ed, Randy was there in 2GE, and he mentioned that he was putting a GMRS repeater up here in the Swannanoa area, and it would cover this entire region. And up to that point, I was ready to I had the forms up and everything for FCC coordination, frequency coordination. I was going to try to get a business license for our road and this area. When he was putting up a GMRS repeater, and it works really well, that is what we're switching to now. So lots and lots of people are going to get on GMRS here. I can tell you now. There'll be a lot.
Big families too, because that's the nice thing about that license.
Yep.
And there are quite a few GMRS repeaters in the western part of North Carolina.
Yep.
But like most of them, there was no power and they went off the air pretty fast.
They're not as robust as like the Mount Mitchell repeater.
Yeah, no. It doesn't sound. I don't think anything. I don't know that there's a repeater that's as robust as the Mount Mitchell. Apparently,
it really proved its worth. It really.
I think so. Question for Thomas: what radios did you hand out?
So it's you just did a video about your favorite HTs, and you had one of them in there, the VX3.
Yes.
I have 3 of those
Oh, good.
because we use those as a family when we would travel
Sure.
out of country, like we go to Canada or something, instead of getting like 4 cell phone lines for everybody. When we go to a town, we would I would distribute those to my daughters, and like we would all, because we all have licenses, we could communicate that way. So the VX3, FT60s. I have, I'm trying to remember now which ones I distributed. I had an Anytone.
You were just grabbing any radio you could get your hands on, programming it up, and handing them out. Oh, man. Wow.
The THF6A is also another one on your list. I distributed one of those.
TFF6? Yeah. It's great.
I actually had a bunch, but what I did with all of them was lock them down so that they were just on the simplex frequency. That's all really the people needed around here. And I didn't want them. I mean, you think about it, it's hard for a ham sometimes to program their own radio, depending on the model, right? If you're a non-ham and you're not used to this, you really want what you really want is a channelized radio or something really easy to operate.
Sure.
But in lieu of that, what you do is lock it down. So you just say, here's the volume control, here's the push to talk. That's what you're going to be using.
Yeah. So we got a number of questions, everybody. We're gonna do one more, and this one's going to be for Dan. But if you're interested to keep this discussion going, link is in the video description for our Discord. We're going to do an after chat. At least Thomas is going to join us. We'll talk to Dan after if he can spend a little bit of time, and then we can just take your questions live, which is going to be a lot faster than me trying to relay them the way I'm doing it now. So go ahead and join us on the Discord, and then go to #live-stream, and I'll be live here shortly again to explain how it all goes. But this question, so from the net format, from what I garnered, my time about 7 p.m., so that would make it 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, you were doing like a daily net tag up or something along those lines. And so the question is, how were messages tracked? Was there a preamble, or did you have a notebook and a pencil? How did you keep track of all this information? Because you were net control for 11 days, right? What did you do?
I have about 4 of these
legal pads,
with call signs, addresses, names, phone numbers, everything. Everything was from like I said, this all started just, hey, did anybody need anything? If retrospect, I should have probably had, an Excel spreadsheet, something, but I didn't. No, just notepad. And when we started going to the EOC on Sunday, the EOC got involved. We set up an email address, and so we started sending stuff to the state as well. But everything, all my notes, I still have today.
Wow. Man, you guys, this is quite a situation you went through, and kind of what you pulled together is just incredibly impressive. I think that I'm not kidding when I say that we're going to be talking about this for quite a while, and the efforts that you did, just very impressive. So thank you for taking the time. I think that, as always, we flew by the hour mark. Whenever Thomas is on, we blow by the hour in record time. So already an hour and a half here. We got to have you back to maybe deep dive this a little bit more with some more questions that we get from the chat. But thanks again for being on. I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, our pleasure.
So, Thomas, I know you know how to navigate Discord. If you want to hop off and just dive in there and see if you can get on. Otherwise, Dan, if you want to hang out, I can talk to you a little bit about doing Discord.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, if you got the time. If you don't, I understand completely, because you're East Coast.
I have the app on my phone. I just really don't know how to use it. I have an account, so it should be easy.
So I'm going to wrap up the show. So we'll pause the Zoom here for a minute, and I'll wrap things up and then be right back to you. So let me go ahead and go to my big thank you for the patrons, guys. Thank you so much for watching and all the good questions. And again, we're not trying to cut your questions off, but join us on the after chat, because we'll take them to the best of our abilities, get them to Dan and to Thomas. Just what an amazing story. And I think the most telling part about it is that, like, they just had to make it happen, right? And it was just a lot of things that came together, dealing with a really kind of a freak disaster, the loss of cell phones, the loss of like power and the fast moving water is just this trifecta of massive amounts of damage. And the fact that they're coordinating airdrops by people just listening to the repeaters saying, we need help over here, we could use some stuff over here. Just amazing. So I really amazing standout discussion, and the fact that amateur radio was involved in it. It could have been other radio services, it could have been GMRS, but I think amateur radio, particularly the Mitchell repeater, really did help. Interstellar Starman just keeps going on about comments on Elon. I don't have any comments on Elon. I have no problem. Like, my issues with Elon have always been of a scientific and engineering nature, not of a political one. I don't even dive into that with him. So Starlink is fine. They did a great job. I'm totally in support of that, of what they did in this situation. But thank you, Interstellar Starman, for bringing that up. I don't know why that matters as much, but there you go. Anyway, thank you to the Coffee Club members. Coffee of the Month Club is going out. We're in our 4th or 3rd month right now. And so check it out. We have a new sticker for the new coffee. Fantastic, delicious coffee. We appreciate your support in letting us do what we can do, my wife and I, with our podcast and, of course, the YouTube channel. And thank you to the patrons. All right, guys, we got to wrap up and get to the Discord after chat. So I got to turn this all around, and I got to talk to Dan a little bit. And I will bid you a 73. Join us in the Discord. Link is in the description. # live-stream. We'll see you there. All right? 73.
Make the link go weird again.
That's one of my favorites.
They've always been weird.
They have always been weird.
It's true. All right, guys.